Have you ever noticed how, at certain times, everything seems to get heavier and obstacles pop up almost in sync? It's like, suddenly, unseen forces are at work to destabilize our faith, weaken our convictions, and steer us off a path that, until then, felt so solid. Many people feel this weight and don't understand where it's coming from, attributing it to chance or bad luck, when, in reality, it might be a real spiritual attack. What few realize is that, most of the time, these signs aren't just coincidences, they're messages from something bigger, pointing to the importance of having a solid spiritual awareness. Throughout this video, you're going to understand better how this relates to the idea of being chosen by God, where you might face intense struggles, but also gather experiences that can deeply transform you. Imagine someone who strives to do everything right. They try to be honest, help those around them, pray sincerely, and avoid paths that have led them into complicated situations in the past. Still, this person starts facing repeated struggles, doors closing for no reason, relationships cooling off out of the blue, projects that seem about to succeed suddenly crashing down. Amid all this, doubts pop up like, am I not capable? Why is this happening to me? And where is God in this situation? These are legitimate questions, but most of the time, they hide an underlying spiritual reality. The greater your calling or vocation, the bigger the onslaught of problems that shows up to destabilize your heart. It's not about playing the victim or blaming negative forces for everything, but being aware of the small signs that something is trying to throw you off your path. When we talk about people chosen by God, we're not referring to untouchable beings, perfect or supernaturally separated from the world. They're actually individuals who, for various reasons, carry a special mission and face obstacles that go beyond the ordinary. You know that feeling when something inside you seems to pulse differently, yearning for a deeper life, discoveries beyond the obvious, and intimate connections with the divine? That could be your spiritual calling, and believe me, it doesn't go unnoticed in the invisible world. It's precisely because you hold such a special seed that you often feel like a target for constant opposition. This is where understanding spiritual attacks and recognizing their signs becomes crucial for maintaining unwavering faith and keeping your focus on what truly matters. There are people who look at a series of incidents as just bad luck, delays happening one after another, family arguments flaring up at critical moments, pain or health issues arising just when something significant is about to happen. Life is undoubtedly filled with ups and downs, but if we look closely, we'll notice that certain patterns reveal the action of something beyond mere chance. We can cite cases where, every time someone decides to get closer to their faith practices, a problem crops up that makes them give up. Or when someone starts dedicating time to reading sacred texts, and shortly after, their routine is flooded with discouragement, impatience, and anxiety for no reason. These examples might seem minor, but when combined, they paint a picture revealing battles being fought in dimensions we don't always see with our naked eye. Instead of just lamenting the unexpected, it's essential to consider this possibility. Could someone or something not want you to succeed in your calling? Often, this type of reflection sparks an unsettling feeling that drives us to seek deeper clarity. Those who begin to notice these details are often surprised by the number of events that aren't as random as they thought. If you feel like something like this is happening in your life, it's always worthwhile to keep a mental record or even jot down in a notebook the repetitive, strange, and poorly explained situations. By analyzing this panorama, you'll be able to see more clearly the pattern behind the difficulties and realize that all of this doesn't need to generate fear or paralysis. Instead, you can find strength in understanding that, indeed, the spiritual world interacts with the physical one more often than we assume. At this point, it's worth knowing about the story of Peter, described in biblical texts, which perfectly illustrates how distractions can sink our faith at critical moments. At one point, the disciples were in a boat when a storm arose, almost turning everything upside down. In the midst of panic, they spotted Jesus walking on the water, and when Peter realized it was the Master, he asked to come to him. Jesus invited him out of the boat, and Peter began walking on the water. However, as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and noticed the wind and the waves, he started to sink. This moment illustrates something simple but profound. When we're focused on what truly matters, we walk in places that seemed impossible. However, if we get distracted by problems, attacks, and ambient noise, our faith gets swallowed by anxiety, and we begin to sink in our insecurities. Frequently, these noises are nothing more than strategies to pull us away from our main focus. Some people go through this when starting new, purpose-filled projects. At first, everything goes well, but soon criticisms and setbacks distract them from the original goal. Instead of staying centered on what really matters, the person begins to dive into doubt or gets caught up in unnecessary arguments. They lose clarity and let themselves be swept away by the tide of attacks coming from all directions. To avoid falling into this trap, it's essential to recognize first, am I being attacked where I'm most vulnerable, or are these distractions consuming my peace and spiritual enthusiasm? This is when the importance of having a guiding thread of faith becomes clear, keeping our eyes on what sustains us, rather than focusing on the size of the waves and storms. Another challenge many people face is the tendency to return to old habits, especially when they feel pressured or worn out. Think of someone who, for years, used negative words to cope with stress or relied on vices that offered temporary relief. Now, this person finds themselves on a path of change, but when faced with a spiritual battle, everything seems to conspire to pull them back into old behaviors. The return to harmful habits doesn't happen by chance. It's as if the ground is being prepared for an exact relapse at the moment when the person is closest to true transformation. That's why surrounding yourself with positive influences, both from people and content, is a valuable way to maintain focus on spiritual growth. Those who persist in this care notice that certain companions and environments no longer make sense, as they only lead to regression. It's not about judging anyone, but protecting your journey, knowing that every bit of caution counts during times of emotional fragility. One of the hardest times during spiritual attacks is precisely when it comes to praying. It seems that the moment we kneel down to seek a sincere connection, 1,000 thoughts invade our minds, discouragement and drowsiness arise, or we even feel like we're talking to a void. It's common to hear people say, "I used to pray deeply and feel a comforting presence. Now, I can barely say 2 words without getting distracted." This dryness may seem strange, but it often indicates that something is blocking your progress. It's not a reason to give up. On the contrary, the harder it gets, the more persistence the situation requires. Repeating small prayers, making it a habit to set aside daily moments to talk to God, even when it feels dry and emotionless, is a crucial step. If faith is weak, it's still important to keep trying. Even if your voice feels aimless, it's during these turbulent times that persistence in connecting with the divine makes all the difference. And when your mind insists on wandering, it's worth relying on fasting, readings that strengthen the soul, and, whenever possible, sharing experiences with people who understand this type of battle. There may come a point when a person thinks, "Why am I going through all this? What's the point of all this challenge?" After all, no one likes to be under constant pressure. But the harsh truth is that these spiritual battles reveal not only human weakness but also the divine strength that manifests at the right time. Those who have overcome such moments know how growth happens. Just as athletes need to face tough training to reach a level of excellence, in the spiritual realm, it's resistance that leads to maturity. The difficulties, rather than just punishing the individual, can make them more self-aware, stronger in their values, and ready to fulfill their mission. Gradually, this process shapes a person who is more attuned to the signs above, more altruistic, and also capable of helping others going through similar storms. And the truth is that everyone is subject to such clashes. You just need to pay attention to the details to recognize how they repeat in different life phases. The invisible world is rich in signs and messages that, if ignored, can catch us off guard. When we talk about spiritual battle, it doesn't mean a physical fight against other people, but against what you can't see, yet often feel. You know those situations where the atmosphere feels heavy, like a tension is hanging in the air? Or those weird dreams that feel like a warning? All of this may indicate a war beyond what we see. And, if there's a fight, it's essential to know what weapon to use. It's not about reacting with aggression or fear but using the spiritual tools given to us: prayer, reading sacred teachings, and practicing values that reflect love and empathy. These elements create a protection that envelopes body, mind, and spirit, bringing a sense of peace even amid trials. It's not a shield to avoid problems, but a solid foundation that supports you when everything around tries to bring you down. In the Christian tradition, there's a lot of talk about how we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. This means that the real struggle isn't with people, but with negative spiritual forces. Sometimes, it's easy to blame a gossiping coworker, an unfair boss, or even family members who don't support us, but it's essential to remember there's something behind all of this. Bad influences and energies floating around can find openings in behaviors and thoughts we nurture unknowingly. The more we fill ourselves with resentment, hatred, or envy, the more we open ourselves up to these negative forces affecting us. On the flip side, the more we cultivate kindness, forgiveness, and gratitude, the more resilient we become in the face of these attacks. This is the basic principle of an invisible battle. If our inner self is strong and free of stains that attract this kind of attack, we end up preventing it from growing or settling in. So, for those who identify with going through conflicts like this, the first step is not to underestimate what's happening. Recognizing the attack is the start of everything. If things feel off in a really strange way, if your mind feels tired and your heart is anxious without a clear reason, it might be time to evaluate the situation more deeply. The second step is to find ways to reconnect with the sacred. If you used to take a few minutes for a heartfelt chat with God, make that a priority again. And if you never had that habit, maybe it's the perfect time to start. A helpful tip is to set a specific time and try to stick to it, even if it starts off quick and simple. When you feel like giving up, remember that this is precisely when your consistency is being tested and strengthened. If you think this topic resonates with your life, a simple action of interaction could be a great way to signal that this kind of reflection is valuable. Oftentimes, just a comment or a quiet contribution to a space where these themes are discussed helps create a network of people with similar experiences, and that strengthens everyone. But the most important thing is to keep your heart open and your mind alert to the signals that come up. Just like there are people who go through repeated failures in their professional and personal lives without realizing there's a pattern, there are also those who shy away from recognizing the source of their attacks because they fear being judged for believing in the spiritual world. However, respecting your own perception and paying attention to it is part of building a strong faith. The attack won't always be obvious or loud. Sometimes it comes in the form of prolonged emotional fatigue, lack of motivation, or constant misunderstandings at home. In many cases, a person only realizes the extent of what they're going through when they're already burned out or very close to giving up on something they still deeply want. That's why it's essential to watch not only the external circumstances but also what's going on inside. When thoughts get more turbulent, or when suddenly there's a desire to throw in the towel, isolate, or act aggressively for no reason, it could be a strong sign that there's a clash happening that goes beyond the physical realm. This is the moment to bring spiritual weapons to the front lines, repeat words of faith, listen to uplifting songs or messages, distance yourself from discussions that only bring negativity, and above all, keep the flame of prayer alive. Another powerful factor in this fight is knowing that no one is alone. Often, the feeling of isolation is one of the most effective attacks because it undermines a person's confidence in themselves and others. If you have the opportunity to talk with someone who shares the same values or understands the foundations of faith, do it. It doesn't have to be a long conversation or filled with formalities, but it can be very refreshing to exchange thoughts on these challenges and discover there are ways to overcome them. The strength that comes from sharing can calm the mind and warm the heart, boosting your perseverance to keep going. When a friend, family member, or even a comment in a safe space reminds us that we're not alone, it becomes easier to resist and move forward. A practical example of how we can notice and resist these attacks lies in our small daily decisions. Imagine you've committed to starting your day by meditating or studying some sacred text. Suddenly, 1,000 urgencies might pop up, messages on your phone, problems to solve. Everything seems to push you to give up that crucial moment for your soul. But if you persist and manage to keep that small commitment, your day flows differently. That decision, repeated and sustained over time, forms a barrier against everything that would silently try to take you off your growth path. Remember, spirituality isn't a one-time activity, it's a constant practice that requires discipline and willpower, especially in times of attack. In all of this, we can't forget the aspect of focusing on Jesus, like in the story of Peter walking on water until he got distracted by the wind's strength. The great lesson from this biblical passage isn't just the miracle of walking on water, but rather the message that our attention should stay on our source of security and salvation. As soon as Peter took his eyes off, fear took hold, and sinking became inevitable. Nowadays, many of us sink into worries, toxic relationships, debt, and anxieties that could be avoided if we kept our focus on what truly matters. If you feel like someone who started off strong but is now drowning in uncertainties, know that this is more common than you think, and there's always a chance to regain control by focusing on what sustains you. It's worth remembering that this focus includes practical life, because it doesn't help to talk about spirituality if there's no coherence in actions. It's necessary to seek integrity in how we speak, think, and act. There's no use in fervent prayer if we live in gossip and grudges. This contradiction ends up opening doors to new attacks, because there's no consistent shield. On the other hand, when a person strives to align their heart and mind with values that promote peace, they create an inner fortress. And this fortress doesn't depend on external circumstances, it's sustained by the internal conviction that a greater purpose governs each step, even when storms arise. Speaking of storms, sometimes the biggest one happens right in our own home. Families are places where emotions are always intense. If you feel like arguments and conflicts pop up out of nowhere, and it only takes a little detail to spark a big fuss, there may be spiritual influences at play, especially if the family is seeking a path of elevation. When the people in a household decide to pray together, cultivate forgiveness, and support each other, that attracts forces that prefer division and discord. In that atmosphere, something seemingly small, like unwashed dishes or a forgotten commitment, can ignite emotional explosions. Recognizing this pattern helps defuse conflicts, because noticing it's not just a trivial annoyance makes people more patient and encourages intense prayer, breaking the cycle that fuels fights. Whether at home, work, or anywhere else, there's a very effective strategy to dismantle these attacks: act with kindness and wisdom. This doesn't mean being submissive to the point of tolerating injustices, but choosing a stance that doesn't feed negativity. When a person notices that a conversation is heading towards conflict, instead of jumping into the fight, they can seek a word of reconciliation or simply stay silent, if needed, until the tension eases. These actions create a type of spiritual protection since negativity finds no fertile ground to grow. It's a way to transform evil into an opportunity to do good. And gradually, this mindset becomes a habit, resulting in less vulnerability to attacks since, to affect someone like that, more challenging situations need to be created, which end up being less frequent. Within this entire scenario, an important question arises: how to stay inspired to keep going, even when everything seems to conspire against you. The answer lies in understanding that there's an endless source of grace and strength available, and also in realizing your worth. Oppositions often try to convince us that we aren't worthy of divine care or that our purpose is too small to matter. This kind of lie tends to weigh us down when we're most tired, leading us to think it's not worth it to keep going, no one cares. It's crucial to remember that each sincere step taken in faith is part of a grand mosaic that we might not fully see right now, but that is relevant beyond our own lives. It's in this sense that we become capable of enduring pressures that seem disproportionate. If you're strongly identifying with all of this, know that it's not by chance you've come this far. Many stories only make sense when we share our experiences and realize we're not alone in our battles. At the same time, each person has their unique journey, with exclusive challenges and learnings, but in the divine plan, each story finds a meaningful connection. If you've ever thought about giving up or experienced moments when the chaos seemed uncontrollable, remember that there's a greater love that sustains everyone, especially in dark days. The more we nurture this certainty, the more we defeat the voices that tell us we can't keep going. To conclude this thought's journey in a striking way, it's worth recapping what we've discussed so far in a few words. Spiritual attacks are real, they can come in various forms, but there's always a way out grounded in faith and love values. There's no need for panic or despair, only for vigilance and determination. Keep your focus on what's essential, recognize when you're facing an attack, and don't let distractions or doubts pull you under. If necessary, revisit old practices that have worked, connect with people who understand what you're going through, and persist in prayer even when it's tough. And above all, don't blame yourself for the obstacles, understand they are part of the growth and spiritual strengthening process. We all face storms, but it's precisely in those storms that we discover how much we can trust the hand that supports us. If this content provided you with clarity or touched your heart in a special way, feel free to engage more actively and share your thoughts on this topic. It might just resonate with others who find strength in your words. And if you want to stay updated on new content about spiritual reflections, you can keep connected easily and effortlessly. After all, when we have access to messages that strengthen us, we become less susceptible to attacks and more connected to a greater sense in life. So, whenever you feel it's relevant, share your perspective or experience. This simple act can make a significant difference in your life and in the lives of others facing similar battles. No matter where you are on your journey, keep one last reflection in mind. Even if it seems like the trials multiply, there's always a possibility for renewal, to bounce back, and to reinforce the pillars of faith. Even when our vision is clouded by difficulties, we can trust that divine care remains, ready to strengthen those who choose not to give up. Each battle won is proof that we can go beyond the limits we thought existed. And if you feel deep down that you were chosen for something greater, understand that the intensity of battles is often proportional to the greatness of the purpose. But none of this needs to be a reason for discouragement. It can, instead, be the encouragement for you to grow and make a difference not only in your life but also in the lives of those around you.